Hello, my dear unknown friends. I'm Ignatus Amicus, and welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone's doing well. Hope to see everyone trickle their way in. Um, while we wait for everybody to get here, I figured I would share a little story. Uh, as you can see, I've got myself a new chair. I I have been on the hunt for a good reading chair for quite a while now, ever since I moved into the apartment. And first and foremost, one of the main criteria was that the chair had to have a tall back of some form or another. I had gone out to a few places in the area. One of them was, I guess you would consider, I guess, more luxury, a luxury version of a furniture store. Um, Even though once upon a time it used to be a furniture outlet that you could get things that were really nice on discount. Sadly, by the time I got there, or by the time I came into the area, that was not the case any longer. And one of the chairs that I really wanted from there was all leather and so on and so forth. But sadly, no no financial means to get that nice leather chair. So I put it in the hands of the Lord, and I figured the best place to allow Providence to work on that, it was to allow him to put it in front of me by occasionally going to the thrift store, because you never know what you get through. You never know what you're going to get when you walk into a thrift store. So, and my wife, as it happens, really enjoys thrifting. So we'll thrift every few weeks or so. Usually, if we come to a point in the kitchen or in her wardrobe where we notice that there is something lacking, so we'll go. And every time we would go, I would like peek over at the section where they set up any of the furniture that they get in the door. Just nothing was really standing out. I didn't want a recliner. I knew I didn't want a recliner, so um and everything that was coming through was a recliner. It was so annoying. Or it wasn't the right color. I knew that at the least I needed it to be some kind of red. Um I have this vague fascination of trying to color coordinate, not so much my wardrobe, but I try to color coordinate the things that are around me. I try to go for blacks. I try to go for reds. I try to go for whites or off whites. The reason being is that there is something to be said with um, uh, what do you call it? Anyhow, it has to do with the psychological effects of color, as well as the symbolism behind color as well. And I just wanted to surround myself in as many instances as possible with colors that have significant meaning, so that I'm constantly reminded of what they represent. On the one hand, those three colors, red, black, white, refer to um, the three philosophical elements. Um, Black being salt, red being sulfur, white being mercury, and then it's the other symbolic correspondences between the blood, bile, and flesh, as well as the mind, the soul, the spirit, and the body. as well as one could argue the black, if we're going with the body, we could say the body of Christ, and the red and the white can easily be could easily correspond to the blood and the water that poured out of his side. So I like to try to keep those three colors in particular at the forefront whenever I'm choosing articles of furniture, clothing, accessories, what have you. So I kept my eyes peeled, and eventually we decided to try a new thrift store that we haven't been to. Up until this point, we had been to just about every Goodwill in the area. And we decided we were going to go and check out 3 out of the 4 thrift stores that weren't Goodwill. In this area, it's called Mission Thrift. It's run by another Christian denomination, probably a non-denominational organization of some kind or another. But with less questionable ethics as to where the money goes compared to Goodwill. I know some people. I have a sister who is really keen on looking into the shady stuff that goes on with Goodwill for some reason. But anyhow, so we went to a small Mission Thrift location. And this chair was sitting there off to the side of one of the aisles, and it was I sat in it, and I was like, I think this is like, you get that feeling sometimes when you're really searching for something and you just can't find it, and eventually when you go someplace that you never thought to go, suddenly you find what it is you're looking for, and you get that warm fuzzy feeling inside that's like, yeah, this is it. So this is it. This is the chair. I don't know if you can see the back. It's got a nice textured brocade, some nice gold accent, nice burgundy color. It's very comfortable. The back is comfortable to sit in, but it has a good bit of spring in the back. So I feel like when I'm sitting in it, I feel like I'm actually sitting upright. Some chairs you sit in and you're like, you feel like you're getting slouched in, but no, this one I can actually I can sit straight. It's very comfortable. The only thing I had to do was put some risers to help bring it up some, so that when both my feet are on the floor, flat on the floor, my knees are level with my hips, which contributes to some of the practices that I've been trying to get better at doing, specifically practices involving the Jesus prayer with the breath, and sort of some newer interpretations of what Tomberg talks about when he's speaking of concentration without effort. If you want to know more about that, then I would highly suggest checking out Scott Mannion, his channel, Metalore. He's doing some incredibly important work that I do believe is divinely inspired. And he has a fellowship you can join if it's something you want to look into. I will try to put I'll try to put the links in the description. Speaking of links in the description, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping real quick. But before we do, I know that we've had a bit of a gap since the last live stream, and part of that had to do with I had to take my wife to an important appointment with immigration down in North Carolina, so wasn't able to stream last week. But in our previous stream, the one where I provide some much needed fraternal correction for Candace Owens regarding questions about symbols and what they mean and the necessity of prudence and temperance when researching these things. While I was scrolling through eBay I was trying to find a reliquary. I was gifted an Agnus Dei that was pressed and blessed by Pope St. Pius X. It was a wedding gift. Now, unfortunately, as of right now, it's sitting in a little plastic bag on my home altar. And I've been trying to find the right reliquary to put it in. And so I just couldn't find one, so I thought, well, let's see what's on eBay. Just to get an idea. And of course, it's just some egregious simony happening on there. But with all that being said, I came across this relic of Saint Maria Goretti. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, why couldn't I have found this picture for my pentagram Candace Owens live stream thing? So I was deeply saddened that I didn't find it sooner with that. But anyhow, so yeah, next time you have any if you're at your little parish meet and greet after Mass and someone tells you that pentagrams are of Satan, I want you to save this picture and show it to them. And then see how red their face turns. So, yeah. Nobody owns geometry, basic geometrical shapes. You know, the fact that they exist does not mean that they are owned by anybody. But of course, the true meaning of any symbol is only ever truly found if it's within the context of He who is truth. Truth being Jesus Christ. He tells us that is the case. So just figured I would show this, and just wish I had it for the last live stream, but sadly did not. With that being said, and since we're on the topic of little house cleaning things, if you haven't yet subscribed, please do subscribe to the channel. All of the content on this channel is free, even if as of right now, the channel is sitting at 876 subscribers, which I'm just flabbergasted. I never thought that I would see this channel grow to where it is now. And I want to thank everybody who has subscribed. It does mean a lot. It means a lot because it makes me realize that there are people who value the discussions that we have here. And I hope that the word continues to spread. So if you haven't yet, please like, share, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If we can get to 1,000 subscribers, that would be really cool. Of course, only if it's in God's will do I wish it to happen. But if you all do have it in your hearts to spread the word and to try to grow what is happening here, so that it reaches more ears, I would be greatly thankful for that. Also, for those who do not yet know, I also have a Substack. So, which I forgot to put a link to in the description. But this is the Sophiurgist. This is my Substack publication. At the Sophiurgist, we discuss topics related to Sophiurgy. I try to give a little. This is a current working definition of Sophiurgy, and you'll notice it bears some interesting similarities, which we can talk about today, I think. So yeah, here are all the ways in which you can support the Sophiurgist and my efforts here. There's a free tier. Every post, essay, and article is available as read-only, and everyone can comment. The paid tier is either monthly or annually. You have access to every post, essay, and everything you can read, or as a bonus to being a paid tier subscriber, you have access to audio versions. So the benefit being that there's no AI voice that's been generated in order to read the posts. I'm beginning to notice that a lot of publications, when you hit play so that you can listen to it in the car, you get that stupid AI voice, and it just grinds my gears to no end. So I decided that for my publication, all of my pieces are going to have an audio version. You can also buy me a coffee. If you go to, once I have the link in the description, you can go to, I'll have a link for my Buy Me a Coffee. For those who don't want to do a monthly or annual subscription, Buy Me a Coffee is a good way that you can leave a little tip here and there. Every little bit is helpful. It's not getting access to the reading material is unfortunately not free. There's also a lot of monographs and other publications that I can tell I might be in need of as research material, but unfortunately is the price is up there for some of these publications, just because it's with either JSTOR or Brill or some of the other academic publishers, and of course they always just charge out the ever-loving wazoo for that sort of thing. Even if I would be able to afford the PDF, that'd be nice, but even the PDFs are just astronomical. So every little bit would help. For those who would be interested in being a full-on patron in the style of like if you want to be my Cosimo di Medici, if you want to be the Cosimo di Medici to my Marsilio Ficino, I have the fourth way you can support is the Societas Sophiurgica. It's the founders tier. When you join, you have the access to read or to listen, but you also get the benefit of having physical correspondence with me, private physical correspondence. And by physical, we're talking snail mail, we're talking handwritten or typewritten. I've got a typewriter. It's collecting dust. I'm begging for an excuse to use it. So please, if you want me to dust it off and to get it nice and oiled up and ready to go, if you want me to get clacking, please do feel free to support if you can. But for those who just want to tip here and there, Buy Me a Coffee is there. So speaking of the paid tiers, I've finally gotten the first recording up for one of my pieces. I guess you could call it technically the first piece at the Sophiurgist, this Return of the Sacred Fire. This was a personal essay that I wrote after taking my wife to see the Fellowship of the Ring 25th anniversary, and just some things that were impressed upon my soul upon viewing it. I won't spoil anything. I'll let you read this. But just to kind of give a preview, still working out how to clean up the audio a little bit. Because I'm not used to doing anything with vocals, so trying to figure out how to get rid of the clicks and some clicks and everything, but it should not sound too bad.
Return of the Sacred Fire. The rekindling of ardor for Middle-earth after 25 years of Tolkienian cinema. By Nyotis Amicus. Dear unknown friends, this wasn't the
So that is that is what's available. That that's the Substack. So I worked some today on the second part of an ongoing series that we're doing over at the Sophiurgist. I don't yet have the audio recording for it yet, but this is on the wondrous works of wisdom. This is an attempt at an attempted treatment of Tomberg's sacred magic. The goal of this series is to collate all of the various ideas and thoughts that I've had from all the reading, research, contemplation, meditation that I've done on passages of Tomberg, on other writings that I've read related to these subjects in light of the Catholic faith. And so these it's an essay. It's going to be in multiple parts just because it's taking some time to write them, and I don't want it to be one big giant long piece that won't fit in an email. In case you're the type of person who will subscribe to someone on Substack and actually read the newsletters in your email rather than on the app. Or if you want to print them off within the email, which I think is a benefit to receiving the newsletters from Substack in your email. It's a little easier to print it off, I think, so that you have it in your hand. But anyhow, so this essay is just kind of going through some of the concepts just from Meditations on the Tarot by Valentin Tomberg and other sources, and trying to distill them, collate them into something readable, not necessarily systematic like this Summa Theologica is, but something a little simpler, even though it is still fairly nuanced. But if you want to give that a read, it's over there. And this also ties into what we're going to be talking about today, if you haven't caught on by the title of the video. But anyhow, yes, part 2 of this is in the works. I'd say I'm about a third through the second part. So hopefully by next week, that's my hope, I will have that for you all. All right. So I know it's hard. It's really hard in 2026 to steer clear as far as is possible from being clickbaity. And I know that a few of my last live streams have had fairly clickbaity titles. I mean, what was it? My video on Iran and parallels in a Japanese anime. The title of that included the phrase "human sacrifice." So, we did kind of talk about it, but and then my Candace one is like, oh, she got it wrong. So I'm like, yes, I know. It's so very difficult to withstand the temptation to be clickbaity. But there can be a case to be made, or a case can be made, that if you feel that the subject is important enough that you want to get it in front of as many people that need to hear it, there are some things that you need to do that would be a responsible use of the algorithm in order to get that material to who you hope it will get to in as efficient a way as possible, given the tools at our disposal. And even talking about that plays into what we're going to talk about today. So magic, that dirty word. At least it's dirty to Christians, most Christians, the majority of Christians. Understandably so. I did a live stream. One of my earliest live streams was a sort of commentary on the Morello Menard debacle. For those of you who don't know, Sebastian Morello, he is a Catholic theologian and philosopher from England. He wrote a book, Magic. What is it? Yeah, Magic, Mysticism, and Monasteries. It's a fantastic book, just a fantastic book. And he got a lot of flack for it. People were grossly misrepresenting what it was that he was actually advocating for. People tried to say that he was actually advocating for people to practice the occult arts. Yet these people critiquing Morello never go so far as to define what these are, which is a problem, which is also kind of hilarious too, as like Menard, for example, he is a scholastic theologian. And so you would think that the scholastic theologian would do the most scholastic thing one can do and define his terms before proceeding with the argument. In fact, I don't think that even his written critique that he wrote with, I think, 2 or 3 others, even close to providing actual definitions, which Morello then had responded by saying, I think he even wrote, I think it's even written in his book. I could be mistaken, but he said something to the effect of, the word magic does not have a univocal or univocal meaning. It doesn't have a unanimous definition. It never has, and it never will. And you can see this when you look at different translations of certain passages in Scripture that deal with people who practice sorcery or who are diviners. Oftentimes the English equivalent changes, because in English we have quite a few different words with which to refer to magicians by. And even then, other languages also don't necessarily have a strict univocal meaning of the word magic. And especially in English, there are many ways in which it can be used. You can use it metaphorically. You can use it allegorically. You can use it. It can be a simile. It can be. You could be literal with it. You could be poetic with it. There's no univocal meaning of the word magic itself. So we need to that is something that we need to ingrain in our brain as we approach this discussion, or any discussion that deals with these subjects. Now, with that being said, there are for those who research, study, or keep an eye out for practices normally associated with magic, that is when we do need to strive towards some form of a definition, as any scholastic would do, as any philosopher worth their salt would do. And there have been some individuals that have attempted to define the word magic. Or maybe, well, I see, and this is where you can fall into semantics, because of words like these, because they have no univocal meaning, can mean many things to many people. And that's not me, bending the knee to nominalism. It just happens to be a fact of reality concerning the usage of the word. Now, of course, in Scripture, in Greek, there's a few different words that are used. One of them being pharmakia. That pharmakia in Scripture refers to magicians and witches and so on and so forth. Then we run into an issue. The word pharmacy, the word pharmacology, the study of medicine. Medicine can be a good, as Paracelsus tells us. The difference between a medicine and a poison is the dosage. I have yet to see anyone prove him wrong. It's just maybe there are some compounds that exist that in order for them not to be a poison, they would have to be in such an infinitesimally diluted form that it's currently impossible to achieve. And so that doesn't mean that all pharmakia is evil. I'm pretty sure that there are plenty of Catholic families out there that have benefited, and have been given access to pharmakia by the grace of God for the healing of their body. So we have to be really careful. This is and just like with what I said in my Candace stream that I did. These subjects have to be approached diligently, and as carefully as one can, which is only going to be possible by grace, first and foremost, with our effort in cooperation with said grace. And so approaching these subjects, we have to make sure that we're prayerful, that we're in as relative a state of grace as we hope that we can be at any given time, that we in every moment of researching these things, we're seeking the will of God. and maintaining that union with Christ that we seek, as much as it's possible to have it this side of the grave. So when we as we approach this subject, the topic of magic, the subtitle of we'll look at the subtitle of the live stream: safe and effective? Question mark. Is it safe and effective? So what I think we'll do is we'll review how Valentin Tomberg approaches the question. And so for that, we're gonna switch on over. We're gonna take a look at Meditations on the Tarot. I know it says by anonymous, but it's nearly unanimously believed that it is Valentin Tomberg. And the only reason we know this is because, from what I understand, is because of the posthumous publication also of his book Lazarus Come Forth. There's just so much similarity in the way that he writes that it matches the way in which the author of Meditations here wrote. And so that's one of the reasons why we believe that he is the author. Not to mention there are people who claim to have assisted him in writing it that claim that he was the one who was writing it. So similar to how the person who wrote the Celestial Hierarchy and On the Divine Names took upon themselves the name of Saint Dionysius the Areopagite. Back in those days, doing so was seen as equivalent to being anonymous. The difference being that you were invoking the name of someone that you respected highly, to provide the gravitas that you wished to direct towards your text. Nowadays, we just say anonymous, by anonymous. And I think it's often a mistake to believe that the reason someone is writing anonymously is because they are a coward. I would highly doubt that someone like this, like Pseudo Dionysius, was a coward. He was invoking, for all we know, Saint Dionysius was his patron saint, and so he chose to write under the patronage of his patron saint. So being an anonymous writer does not make you cowardly ipso facto. In some instances, being an anonymous writer is an act of humility. It's one of the reasons why my channel is called Ignotus Amicus, Latin for unknown friend, or hidden friend. Well, hidden friend would be Occultus Amicus. Maybe I should have called this channel Occultus Amicus. Maybe that would I don't know, that would probably trigger too many people. So Ignotus Amicus it is, unknown friend. Like, I haven't shared with anyone my real name, not because I'm trying to hide, but because it's not for me, it's not about who I am. Like, for me, it's not about the fact that I'm the one doing this, that I'm the one who's putting these videos up, who's writing these essays, who's doing all this research, who's taking the time to contemplate and meditate on all these things. It's about the content itself. And my hope that it is fruitful for you all. Like I say at the end of a lot of my videos, if these videos bring good fruit into your life, please like, share, and subscribe. It's a conditional All right, it's a condition. The condition has to be met. If you don't think my video is fruitful, then you don't have to like, share, and subscribe. Because it's like, for me, anonymity, just to get to the point without getting off on a tangent, so that we can move on. Anonymity is not ipso facto cowardice. It can be an act of humility, and I would argue that in this instance, it is an act of humility on the part of Valentin Tomberg, even though now the anonymity doesn't hold much of its weight. So let's get to there here. And I wish there was a way I can widen the view. 2-page view. There we go. That's better. All right, so we're going to letter 3, the Empress. All right. So, and here's another, for anyone who's ever been curious, because I know that I've mentioned it a few times. A lot of times, Valentin Tomberg doesn't often reference Mary in terms of sacred magic. If he does, it's more subtle. He kind of I've noticed he tends to more often play to the masculine archetypes when it comes to illustrating divine magic. But I stress this is, and my contention is, and this is based on my my experience and my time with this book and the ideas in it. And I just think, that he includes this scriptural verse in particular, I think really illustrates, and it's one of the subtle ways in which Marianism is present within the whole concept of sacred magic. You know, behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord, be it done unto me according to your word, the fiat. And as you'll see when we go to read the Tomberg's definition and categorization of magic, we'll see that this is at the heart of what sacred magic is. It's inherently Marian. And there's just, in my view, there's no other way about it. So, moving on. So, Valentin Tomberg, letter 3 of Meditations on the Tarot, he, right off the bat, he starts right from the beginning and tells us what the third arcanum of the tarot is. Right here, quote, "The third arcanum, the Empress, is that of sacred magic. Now there are 3 kinds of magic. Magic where the magician is the instrument of divine power. This is sacred magic. Magic where the magician himself is the source of the magical operation. This is personal magic. Lastly, magic where the magician is the instrument of elemental forces or other unconscious forces. This is sorcery. The teaching of the third arcanum in view of the context of the card and its place between the second and fourth arcana refers to sacred or divine magic." All right. We'll take a moment. So right there, we have Tomberg's definition of magic. Right off and so I wanted to keep in mind that even though he doesn't outright say it, and I mentioned this in part 1 of the essay on Substack. even though he doesn't cite it. I mean, Tomberg provides all kinds of citations, but one citation he doesn't make, and I think it was a conscious choice on his part not to invoke the name. But to me, it's no question that this definition of magic at the beginning of letter 3 is a reference. He's riffing off of the definition of magic by Aleister Crowley. And so what is Aleister Crowley's definition? So Crowley's definition is magic is the art and science of causing change to occur in accordance with will. And of course, Crowley, he does this thing where he differentiates between the lower will and the higher will, or the true will. The true will being your true self's will. Note that it's never God's will that he's talking about. And what he does is he turns will into a proper noun, so it's capitalized. In Tomberg's definition here, we clearly see that magic, that he has put magic within the context, or within the question of the will. And then he provides us 3 categories. And in providing us 3 categories of magic, Tomberg is showing us that there's a secondary question. So if the first main question is that magic is a question of will being enacted, then the follow-up question is, whose will? And he, again, right in that first paragraph, he tells us. So you have sacred magic, personal magic, and divine magic. Sacred magic, yeah, but we can go back, and then I'll recontextualize. So, sacred magic is magic where the magician is the instrument of divine power. Then personal magic is magic where the magician himself is the source of the magical operation. And then sorcery is magic where the magician is the instrument of elemental forces or other unconscious forces. So to put it in simpler terms, sacred magic is God's will be done. Behold the handmaid of the Lord, be it done unto me according to thy word. It's why he drops that quote at the beginning of the 3rd letter. Because it's a question of whose will. So sacred magic is God's will be done. Personal magic is my will be done. My will, right? And then sorcery is the will of the unknown. Now the unknown could be anything. The unknown could be something mimetic. Like you could be enacting, and we see this with a great example of sorcery. Maybe a little humorous example of sorcery is you're on social media and you get an advertisement for a product, and somehow or another they've figured out that this would be a product you would be most likely to buy. All right. And so through the operations of the algorithm, using the algorithm, which most companies don't quite understand how they're algorithms actually work in truth. They're at the mercy of whatever the algorithm is doing. So there's one unconscious force. And then it acts upon you by viewing the ad for that product. And then if you go and you buy that product, you've just performed the will of something disembodied, of something unconscious. So, and sadly, we're all guilty of this. We're all guilty of sorcery. We're all guilty of having bought something off an ad on social media that was something that obviously fits within our personal aesthetic, our personal tastes, our personal lifestyles. But we didn't necessarily make the choice of ourselves. The algorithm, this unconscious force, worked upon us, and we ended up enacting its will. And we were duped into thinking that it was ours, that it was our will that we were doing. So it's a question of will. Let's see. I guess here, let's see. Quintandil has a question. So what's the difference between sacred magic and ordinary Christian prayer? I think we might get to that here. Yeah, I think we will touch on that. So it's a legitimate question, a good question. And I think we're going to get to it. So just bear with me. All right. So we've established that magic is a question of enacting the will. Fundamentally. And we've also established that magic concerns, that there's three categories of magic concerning whose will is being enacted. Now, it could be argued, you can look at it from another perspective, or there's another angle with which you can approach the question, or the main question, the fundamental question, and the follow-up question. In the first and third category, so in sacred magic and in sorcery, they are photopositive and photonegative versions of each other. So on the part of sacred magic, in both instances, you are an instrument. You are the passive yet active participant in the enacting of the will in question. In the case of sacred magic, you are the instrument of God's will. You're opening yourself up to being the instrument through which God's will enters into existence, enters reality as a matter of fact. Whereas the reverse of that, the photo-negative of that in sorcery is the same thing is occurring. The same basic effect is occurring. The difference is that the fact of you being an instrument is still the case. The difference is that in sorcery, your You as the instrument, the will that you are enacting is one that you do not understand, that you are not conscious of at all. And even in the case where it's a demon that is using you as an instrument, you're not going to know that it's a demon. Inversely, on the photopositive side, with sacred magic, you have, it's very different. It's a very different scenario. In the instance that you become the instrument of God's will, he does not obscure the fact that it's him. He makes it very well known to you. If you have allowed him to, if you have allowed his grace, the graces necessary to discern him work within you, he does make it abundantly clear that he is the one enacting whatever is occurring through you. All right, so sacred magic, sorcery, you're both, in both instances, you're the instrument. But in sacred magic, you know that it's God. You know he's using you as the instrument, and he's doing it in a loving way. And the miracle, the magic is effected. In sorcery, you're still the instrument, but it is not certain what it is whose will you are enacting. So then we get to the middle category. And in the middle category, we have personal magic. Tomberg also refers to it as arbitrary magic. And I think the word arbitrary is well chosen. Calling it arbitrary, just to kind of, to keep it simple, think about something that you do, or something that you buy, or something that you doodle, something that's arbitrary. It has no relation to anything. It has no connection necessarily to anything. It would, an example of arbitrariness would be if all of a sudden I switch the subject of the stream right now to talking about making sourdough bread. That would be an arbitrary decision that I would have made. That is unrelated to everything else that's happening, to the natural progress towards the end that we originally set out to accomplish. So I think arbitrary is probably the better word to use, but also in calling it personal magic. This is kind of what has spurned the subject of today's video and the question posed by the title, which we'll get into here shortly. So you have, in personal magic, it's my will be done. And what's fascinating is, compared to the other two, which are photonegatives of each other, like I said, in personal magic, you're not the instrument. In personal magic, you have emancipated yourself from the position of being an instrument, and instead, you reverse things on a completely different axis. So in the other two categories, the axis is on the axis of being an instrument. Well, you've just completely, in personal magic, you're perpendicular to the prior continuum, and so now it's a question of what is going to be your instrument. And that's why Tomberg uses the phrase that what is it? The phrase is, the magician himself is the source of the magical operation. That's what he means by that. He means that you become the will. You become the will, and that everything else becomes your instrument. When you contemplate this, when you meditate on this, and you try to picture examples of this, at least to me, it became really clear that in personal magic, one suffers being cut off from something. Maybe in a subtle way. In other circumstances, possibly in a more overt way. But again, you're shifting by practicing personal magic, you're shifting into a completely different vertices, completely different axis, perpendicular to the prior. So now we reach, with this in mind, we can come to, actually, tell you what, we'll go ahead and we'll move on in meditations here, because there is okay, here we are. So a little later on in the letter, we get some talk about whether something is safe or dangerous. All right, and this is where this is where the title of this live stream is coming from. And I want to go to here, this section here. So if it is true that by practicing personal magic we are emancipating and divorcing ourselves from the continuum that is in the majority of amongst the three categories, then it would be safe to say that there is some risk involved in doing that. And I can't remember if he touches on this later on in the book, but it almost makes me think of the fall. It makes me think of the first transgression, where we went from being pre-lapsarian to post-lapsarian. The knowledge of good and evil, and the false promise that you will be like unto God, or you will be as like gods, knowing good and evil. And one of the consequences of this knowledge is the responsibility the sheer weight of responsibility that is required of one who has that knowledge. And even though we were made in the image and likeness of God, we weren't created to have that knowledge of our own volition. That knowledge was supposed to be given to us through him, through the Father, through Jesus, and through the Logos. That was, and it was important for that to be the case because it helps to properly contextualize the discernment between good and evil. The author of everything has to be the one that provides the context for that discernment. And with the sin, with the original sin, we did what the personal magician does. We emancipated ourselves. We threw ourselves perpendicular to the established. Now, it could be argued that what Eve did was sorcery. But I don't think that I would agree with that because it was a sweeter transgression for the devil that Eve commits it of her own will and not of his, which is why he frames it as, which explains the way in which the devil frames the encounter, the dialogue concerning the forbidden fruit. So that's why I would argue that Eve taking the fruit, eating the fruit, was the first act of personal magic. Again, that emancipation, going perpendicular to the established flow, for lack of a better phrase. And so with that came original sin, came exile from paradise, and the wages of sin, which is death, as well as separation, which only seems natural when you take the time to ponder these things. And so one could say the danger is death. The risk is death. If not physiological death, certainly death of the soul. And that is the danger that is referred to here in Meditations. Quote, "The formidable dangers of arbitrary or personal magic have been described by all those who have had direct or indirect experience of this." And then he cites Cornelius Agrippa, Eliphas Levi, and Papu, or Pappus, however that one's pronounced. He says, "These three guys have said sufficient to prove that arbitrary or personal magic is most dangerous." He goes on. He says, "For sacred or divine magic, one risks only that it is inoperative because of an error on our part," is what he means, "which can be distressing, but it comprises no danger." So we have, it's a stark warning, and it's, it's worth heeding. In fact, you ought to heed the warning. You really should. It's not something to be taken lightly. With that being said, one could say that it could be said original sin, the first act of personal magic, is like the post-lapsarian default. So from the time of the fall onward, personal magic is the default. And I've seen some commentaries and some I've seen commentaries and other writings about the civilization that grew prior to Noah, from the descendants of Cain, and the things that they were into. You sometimes hear, I think, there's mention of it even in like the books of Enoch or what have you. And it's believed by some that personal magic really had its heyday during that period from the fall to before the flood, and that it was nearly wiped out because of the flood. And then we kind of get into the conspiracy theories about the Nephilim and the blood of the Nephilim, and whether or not the descendants of Ham are the ones that copulated post flood with the Nephilim that survived, or there's a lot of really strange stuff out there. But I think it's actually a mistake to try to lay the blame for the continuing existence of personal magic and sorcery upon entities that no longer dwell on Earth. And it is more likely that personal magic is directly related to original sin in some way. Maybe in a metaphorical sense, maybe in an allegorical sense, a symbolic sense, maybe not in actuality. But there's something there. There's something there. I think it's something worth thinking about, contemplating, pondering, praying about, because I think it does have bearing one way or the other. So now we're left with a question about basically between safety and danger. And it would be easy to think that in this passage, Tomberg is saying that that arbitrary, while he does say it's most dangerous, and that it's risky, what he's not saying is that it is a state of absolute danger. There is, and so if we take our understanding we have of the three categories of magic, the question of the will, their relationship to each other, the way they relate to each other or differentiate from each other, and we now look at all of that through the lens of the question of safety versus danger. quite easy. It's quite easy to see that sacred magic, sacred magic is safe. It comprises no danger, to quote Tomberg. Then you have sorcery, and yes, Christina, you've got it. Sorcery is the most dangerous, but I want us to be careful of the word dangerous. We will say that sorcery is absolute danger. Danger as a noun, like it exists as danger. It's composed of danger. Sacred magic, absolute safety. All that you risk is it's inoperative. So then the question is, so this is why in talking of personal or arbitrary magic, he's referring to it as dangerous. Dangerous is a word denoting a state. The word dangerous denotes a state of potential danger. It's a state of potentia. Danger is possible. Now, within a state of potential, there is the potential for there's the potential for it to not be dangerous. But he does provide the qualification of most, that arbitrary magic is most dangerous. Of course, in Meditations on the Tarot, talking about magic, he's not talking about, or maybe he is. Yeah, sometimes one can get go a little too far with interpreting Tomberg, I think, because as I illustrated earlier, the algorithm on social media got you to buy something that you thought you needed. You might not have needed it. And so one could argue that succumbing to the will of a social media algorithm is you performing sorcery, because you are the instrument of unconscious forces. So something like building a house, or building a house, inventing something, it has the potential to fall under the category of personal magic. Gosh, what's it like? I guess a good example of personal magic could be, you don't need to take a bath, but you take a bath anyway. So you turn the water on. Or you wanted to have a nice hot bath, but you're living in the woods. So you construct a nice outdoor shower. Excuse me. Whew, boy, that came out of nowhere. My apologies. So you're in the middle of nowhere. You only have access to running water, so and wood, some means of creating a fire. And so you do one of these cool primitive tech things where you build yourself a really nice cozy Roman bath, with nice hot water. even though you don't technically need to have a bath. So, like, someone could argue that that's personal magic, because it would, in the case that you don't need to take a bath, it's arbitrary that you would choose to take a bath, that you go through the motions to enact filling the tub, putting your bath salts in, putting on a nice tune to listen to. Music. Talk about personal magic. Marsilio Ficino talks about how certain music within certain types of scales have certain effects upon our bodies, upon our mind, and the soul. And that knowing how it does so can be a way to help stave off melancholy. Which is, he talks about it in 3 books on life, which he basically wrote as like a medical guide for people who are intellectuals and easily get depressed. So music can be considered personal magic. If you come up with a song, and if it's a song that doesn't have much to do with transcendental things or supernatural things, then could be personal magic. Christina Marie says, it sounds like personal magic includes our creativity. Okay, so here's why we're about to get into why I titled the video what it is. So, magic, is it safe and effective? Is it safe and effective? So now that we've reached the question of safety versus danger in regards to our 3 categories of magic, and since we've talked about the this how personal magic is a separation or emancipation from one vertices describing magic to one completely separate, related to the question of our being instruments of the will in question. I want us to now take a moment to hold in our minds the cross, not necessarily the not necessarily the crucifixion, although you can, and we will take the crucifixion into consideration. But let me pull this up here. This is this is an illustration that I did quickly for part 1 of the essay series. The section that this is from is called the Hermeneutic of the Holy Cross, or the Hermeneutic of the Cross. In Meditations on the Tarot, there are multiple instances where Tom Berg takes this and he ascribes different things to A or B. And the reason he does, gosh, this is where Meditations is a fairly complicated book. So maybe not complicated. What's his name? Roger Buck. He's a YouTuber from England. He's lived in Ireland a long time. He's a convert from New Ageism. And Tom Berg is one of the one of the facets to that informed his conversion, along with other personal experiences that he had. He often says in his videos that Meditations on the Tarot is 1,000 books rolled into one. It's not just about one thing. And I think that's why it's called Meditations. It's like he's taking the imagery of the tarot cards and he's using it as a springboard to talk about all kinds of things. And one of the things that he talks about is magic. And another thing that he talks about is the crucifixion and the cross and the many different ways in which the basic geometry of the cross plays a part in the way in which all these different things can be understood. And I think that we can apply it here. And this is why I used this analogy of personal magic being this separation, this going perpendicular to the natural, to the flow of things, and why I tied it as a possible tie or correspondence to original sin, or to the taking of the apple. And I don't know if I've ever shared. I don't know if I've ever shared it, but I had an experience that occurred while I was pondering a passage in Meditations, actually, that I wasn't able to wrap my head around it intellectually, but I could tell that there was something there. And so I just, before I even knew of the ins and outs of actually practicing concentration without effort, I probably slipped into something akin to it. And eventually I decided I was going to go to bed, said my evening prayers, blessed my bed, laid down in bed, and it was shocking. It was a shocking experience, sort of like instant info dump of important stuff. Just to put it in colloquial terms, as much as one can. And the passage, and I can't remember exactly where it is off the top of my head, but there's a passage somewhere in Meditations where Tom Berg is talking about the difference between taking and being gifted. And I think that it plays a part in the distinctions being made between the different categories of magic, and between the question of the safety of something and the danger of something. It is dangerous. The potential for danger exists if you arbitrarily go and take something. Keeping with the symbolism of fruit, it's one thing to go up and take fruit of your own arbitrary will. Say for example, the fruit's not yet ripe. Yeah, the fruit is not yet ripe. It's not the right color, not the right firmness. And it's out of its season, and you choose to take that fruit anyway, and you eat it. Well, there's going to be there's going to be consequences to having taken the fruit, even if you don't eat it. All sorts of things are going to happen to a prematurely picked fruit. The seeds inside might not be mature enough to propagate the plant in question. And then, of course, if you eat it, if it's not ripe, there's going to be all kinds of compounds and things present within the fruit that may not be digestible, along with other things. So, taking something arbitrarily based off of your own personal will and choice you run the risk of doing so at the improper time and place. The result of which can potentially be that you poison yourself. And you can draw that analogy to the life of the soul. You could potentially poison your soul. And that's personal magic. But what if we stick with the analogy? There is the potential, as we're, dangerous being the word describing the potential for danger. Well, there's also a potential for the opposite, because if we're talking about a state of potentia, it means there are fluctuations in that potential, or not fluctuations. There are all kinds of different things that can happen, all kinds of potentials that could become actualized. So, keeping with this taking fruit rather than being gifted fruit. Let's say that you happen to arbitrarily choose to take fruit from the same tree. This time, you happen to take it when it is ripe, in its due season, and then you eat of it. Well, the seeds within it are mature enough that they can successfully propagate and multiply the species of the fruit. And also, the meat of the fruit no longer poses risk of poisoning, because despite having arbitrarily chosen to take, you took it in its due season when it was ripe. Obviously, it is so much better. And this is the thing that kind of just got info dumped into my brain in an instant. I know it sounds crazy, but you can take it or leave it. You don't have to believe me. You can just assess if anything that I'm telling you as a result of whatever the experience was bears you any fruit. If it does, great. If it doesn't, then so be it. But so in the case of being gifted fruit instead, well, what would gifting fruit look like? Well, you've learned, you've lack of a better phrase, you've communed with the tree. You've observed the tree carefully. You've discerned the life cycle of the tree and its fruits. You've patiently observed the way in which the wind blows through its branches, and the way in which the fruit and when the fruit gets ripe and when the fruit falls from the tree. And then instead of going and picking the fruit, instead you place yourself beneath the bough of the tree where the fruit hangs, and you hold your hands out and you wait, and you trust that the tree and the fruit is going to do what it always does. And eventually the fruit will fall off the tree into your outstretched hands if you've paid attention and if you've been careful enough to place yourself in the right place at the right time. That is illustrative of how sacred magic poses no danger. The fruit necessarily is not going to fall off the tree until it is darn well ready to. And that's why I said earlier when we were discussing about original sin and the fall, the tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil would have been gifted. God never said that he was never going to tell Adam and Eve the difference between good and evil. The devil existed. They would have had to have learned eventually. The first step in them learning was being told that the tree of knowledge was forbidden. Excuse me. So there's back to this analogy of if you're going to be someone who's going to take rather than to receive, then yes, there is a danger. You could potentially pick that fruit too early and out of season and harm yourself. But the potential is also there that you could arbitrarily take the same fruit, but in its due season and when it is ripe. And so this is where the question of, is magic safe and effective, comes into play. Even in personal magic. Even in personal magic, there is the potential for danger just as much as there is the potential for there to be no danger, for there to be safety. But it's not, the thing is, it's not guaranteed. And that's the risk. Now, this is not, for clarification, this is not an endorsement. This is not an endorsement to practice personal magic. This is not an arbitrary endorsement. All right, this is just working through the natural conclusions that come about when contemplating the ways in which Tomberg describes magic in all its forms to us. Now, I bring up the this diagram. This is the hermeneutic of the cross. A conjoins with B, and it gives birth to C. It's a relationship. It's not a question of opposites. It's not it's not negative A on the one vertices and positive A on the other. That would just cause negation. These vertices represent complementaries, not opposites. The vertical is the complement of the horizontal, and when they conjunct, they give birth to the point. This is what the symbol of the rosy cross stands for, and the rose has 5 petals, which is a symbol of Christ. So, like the rosy cross is a symbol of the crucifixion, because it's representing the 5 wounds of Christ. This is something that has been forgotten. This is something that's been forgotten, thanks in part to people who just really don't like Christianity, so they're gonna shove in as much Egyptian gobbledygook as they can into these more esoteric subjects to obscure what was actually being referred to. And so if we look, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor? I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but if we take figure 1, and if we have A is magic in the context of one being an instrument, and then we take B as being the axis of personal magic. Now, on the A vertices, the upper portion, we can think in terms of it being the realm of sacred magic. It is pure. It's purely safe. And then below is the spectrum of sorcery, which is pure danger. Now, personal magic does not lie on this vertices. Again, it has separated itself because it's arbitrary. It's not, because it's arbitrary, it's not aligned. But it's not, strictly speaking, opposed. That's why it's not the thing that is at issue is the emancipation, the cutting off. The cutting off happens because of our volition, not on the volition of God. We're the ones that emancipate ourselves. And yet, because we still bear the image and likeness of God, that's why the B vertex, the B axis is not an opposite. It is still it has a complementary aspect by virtue of the image and likeness that we possess of God. And so you can almost take a diagonal cut. We can call it D, the D axis, which would cut diagonally. Again, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it would cut diagonally from the top left to the bottom right. And we could call that the axis of safety or danger. And so any personal magic that would occur on, let me see, here we go. All right. Any personal magic. Oop, am I doing that? No. Okay. I'm trying. Again, I don't know if you can see my cursor moving around on the screen. Please hit 1 in the chat. I want to try to make this as easy as possible. Are you able to see that cursor? 1 for yes, 0 for no. I'll give you a minute or so. Anybody? Anybody? Can anyone tell me if they can see the cursor on the screen? I need to know desperately. I don't have my little whiteboard, or I would draw it. Okay. Well, anyhow. All right, I'll try this one more time. I'll try to be a little more concise here. Let me get like okay, good, perfect. All right. Christina says she can see it. All right. So let's imagine a third axis cuts through here. Okay. On this side of that axis is danger. On this side of the axis is safety. If we are so this is where the discussion about the potential for danger also implies or infers a potential for safety. So if we take this new diagonal axis into consideration, we can meditate on how that applies to everything that we're talking about, especially with the analogy I gave of taking. So if we cannot but help to take, it's better to receive than to take. So if we cannot help but to take, we run the risk of personal magic putting us here, squarely in danger, but on this axis, as opposed to this axis here. So in this quadrant, regardless of if you're in the sorceress or in the personal, this quadrant is danger. Danger, danger, danger. The just for the sake of the analogy, the quadrants wherein the axis of danger lies are void. There's nothing there. Okay, it's like baseline. This quadrant is the instance in which one takes the fruit within its due season when it is ripe and good to eat. Now, one of the things that we could think of in considering this is that the original sin was squarely here in this quadrant, but on this new axis that Eve creates when she takes the fruit. Just notice the devil doesn't pluck it. The devil didn't pluck it. If the devil had plucked the fruit and then handed it to Eve, that we could say would be sorcery. Because that would have been her being an instrument of the devil. But she didn't. She took it, so she created this axis. And it was in this quadrant where the eating of forbidden fruit took place. And so, what is the opposite of that? What would be an example, most basic example, of personal magic wherein there is no danger? That personal magic that is within full safety, absolute safety. Well, one argument that could be made is eating the opposite fruit. You know, this, but I would argue that in the garden, if we're going to stick to that, in the garden, if they ever did eat of the tree of life, I suspect that it was more akin to what I was describing, where instead of taking from the tree of life, they observed it, they knew how they knew the life cycle of the fruit of the tree, and so they would just place themselves right where the fruit would fall and wait for it to fall out into their hands. Not taking, they were holding their hands out in askance, which is a completely different posture, completely different attitude compared to taking. Now, one could arbitrarily sit there and wait, in which case it would have been personal magic. And you can do that. There's just no guarantee that there's more of a guarantee that you're going to be there a long time if you're not diligent enough, discerning enough to place yourself accurately at the right place at the right time. So an example of this receiving the fruit that would be more akin to sacred magic would be if you were in, if you were directly communicating with God, discerning his voice in your every moment of life, and in total obedience to what he was asking of you, he would be the one to tell you. He would be the one to tell you where to stand and when to stand. And we see instances of this all throughout Scripture. How many times do we see this in Scripture? I'm going through the Old Testament right now, doing a Bible in a year reading plan. I just started the book of Judges. No, sorry, started the book of Joshua. All right, just finished the Pentateuch. Pentateuch? Yeah, just finished the Torah, the Pentateuch. And even in just the Pentateuch, there's so many instances where God says, it's not time for you to be in this place yet. You gotta wait. In some instances, it's because of disobedience, but there are other instances where it's like, okay, go over here. And just wait. Okay, now do the thing. And they do the thing, and the miracle happens. All right. That is different from, it's different from striking the rock the second time with your staff. Okay. So striking the rock with the staff the second time is an example of personal magic. The first time was sacred magic. And so back to the analogy of how Adam and Eve may theoretically have eaten the fruit from the tree of life, is that God would have told them when and where to stand. And if they did that, they never would have gone hungry. They never would have gone hungry. And it would have been in conjunction with God's will. They would have been on the vertical axis, and there would have been no axis of safety or danger. That axis only exists because of original sin. So, but now, because of the existence of the axis of safety and danger, we have to, you can, of your own will, strike the rock a second time. You can go to the tree, you can hold your hand out under a fruit, but if the fruit's out of season, you're going to be waiting there a long time. Eventually, you'll be rewarded for your persistence and your constancy, which, given the right context, can be virtuous. Even though the initial choice was your own will, arbitrarily, based upon your theoretical knowledge of God, his graces, which again can put you into the realm of danger if you become too presumptuous, or if you tempt the Lord your God, which is why tempting God is considered sinful. So this is where one can infer that there are instances where personal magic might not pose pure danger, but for sure, if you're if you're not praying, if you don't have a prayer life, if you don't have time that you take to be in silence, if you're not frequenting the sacraments, if you're not participating in the liturgical cycle of the church, all of these things contribute to, at minimum, aligning your arbitrary will with God's will, so that at minimum, you can still technically do all the things that you know you should, but as we know, the letter of the law is nothing without the spirit behind it. You have to have both. Ultimately, the goal is to realign ourselves back onto the proper axis. And once we have aligned ourselves to the proper vertical axis, that is when there's no threat of danger. And this is why Tomberg says sacred magic poses no danger. It simply can be inoperative due to some error on our part. The error is never on God's part in sacred magic. There is error on the part of personal magic because, again, we're on a completely different axis, even though, because we bear the image and likeness, we're still in relation. If we were truly opposed, we would be a completely separate vertices. It would be two parallel axes. One being the photonegative of the other. And they can't conjoin because they can't share the same space, speaking in mathematical terms. To do so would be to annihilate, because a negative and a positive, it's basic arithmetic. Positive and a negative, when you add them together, it produces zero, produces nothing. Whereas 1 and 1 make 2. And they're 2 in union, which is why the sign for addition is a cross. It's a cross. Oh gosh, there's so much there that can be its own video. That is something that I need to get into researching, because arithmology, the theology of arithmetic. Oh my gosh, there's already the very little that I've dove into. I can already tell there is something incredibly rich there, and it's making me reconsider the emphasis that Christian hermeticists, Christian esotericists give to Lurianic Kabbalah. So, yeah. And again, going back to our diagram, it's the cross, the crucifix. Like, it's not an accident. It's not an accident that the instrument with which our redemption was wrought took this shape. Everything that this shape has symbolized is present within the instant, is present at the crucifixion. It's a symbol of consummation. And what is consummation? It's what you do on your wedding night. And who's the bridegroom? And who's the bride? The church is the bride. Christ is the bridegroom. We have to be consummate. Like when we consummate, when we commune, we are, it gives birth to something, because that's the natural end and point of the consummation of a marriage, is to bring something new, to birth something that's alive. And that's why, this is one of the reasons why Tomberg uses the cross as a hermeneutic, as a key, a lens through which to look at everything, because it helps to, it unlocks so much. It unlocks so much. And especially when you tie it to the crucifixion, to the passion of Jesus. There is so much there. So much there. We'll try to wrap it up here, but I do want to briefly, as briefly as I can, explore where we can, with this understanding of an axis of safety and danger in relation to personal magic and divine magic in this quadrant, I want us to think in terms of, first of all, like whenever you guys log off and go to bed and wake up the next day, keep in mind, and maybe spend some time in prayer and contemplation, thinking about the times in our lives where we strive to do God's will, and we do so through our own, choice, based upon the things that we've learned, based upon the theory, the catechism. We read the catechism, and we know that it prescribes a certain intellectual assent and bodily conduct that is necessary for one to even remotely be considered Christian, Catholic. And so take the time to think about all the times in your life where you have of your own arbitrary will conducted yourself in the way in which the catechism, the way in which the church has taught us to conduct ourselves, in relation to the commandments of God and the precepts of the church, and so on and so forth. And just to reflect upon how doing so does not necessarily of itself open you to danger. And that doing so is can be considered an act of personal magic, but within the zone of safety. Because even though these instances are arbitrarily chosen and enacted upon by our own will, though it is based off of an intellectual understanding of the commandments and precepts of the church and of God, there is still danger. There's lukewarmness that we can fall into and things, and so we have to be diligent. Now, taking this concept further, let me introduce you to this right here. Now, I can't read that, just to be clear, but I wanted to at least show you guys a page of the actual manuscript. This manuscript is known as the Liber Lucem, or the Liber Lucis, the Book of Light. It was written by a Franciscan friar by the name of John. He's also John of Rupescissa. I don't even know how to begin to pronounce that. I can speak some French, but I can't read it when you get like the double L's throw me off all the time. Best guess that's Roquetaide. Taida? Roquetaide? I'm probably butchering that. Forgive me. I'm better with Latin pronunciation. So John of Rupescissa is another name for him. He was a French Franciscan. He was also an alchemist. Okay. Now, alchemy, by and large, falls within the category of personal magic. Now, there's always the question of whether it falls into the zone of safety or the zone of danger. And this Franciscan made the attempt to show the ways in which alchemy could be used for acts of charity, for the betterment of bodily health of their Christian neighbors, as well as some of the symbolic underpinnings of sort of like, or the deeper meanings. He was one of the first alchemists that I've been able to find who actually went to he discovered the correspondence between the different stages of alchemy and the different stations of the Passion of Christ. The Passion, death, and resurrection of Christ, which is which I think is phenomenal, and within that context, it's worthy. This is the window which opens up alchemy as something that can be used within the zone of safety as a form of personal magic if you consecrate it to God. Saint Albert the Great has helped tremendously with this, even though I think he predates this guy, or may possibly, I think he. Here, let's see. Let's see. So Albert the Great, what? Okay, so he died before the turn of that century. So yeah. So John of Rupescissa, he was not a contemporary. He was actually born 30 years after Albertus Magnus died. So he probably would have been more a contemporary with Thomas Aquinas, I think. Let's see. Oh no, Thomas Aquinas, he was short-lived. Yeah, okay. So, all right. So this guy was not a contemporary of Aquinas or Albert. But for sure, as did most other alchemists of the time and later, they owe much of their understanding and success to the work of Albert the Great, regarding his natural philosophy and natural magic. Natural magic just being code word for medicine, if you want to take it that route. Well, alchemy, one of the impetuses behind alchemy is being able to apprehend the spiritual aspect of everything that you're doing in communion with, in conjunction with its physical reality. In other words, alchemy is the liturgically is the liturgical realists' chemistry. It's the liturgical realists' medicine making. In fact, this guy right here, he was very concerned with rehabilitating alchemy. Alchemy already had a bad reputation. I can't remember if by this time there was already a papal bull against the practice of turning lead into gold and things like that. And so because the turning lead into gold is condemned, everything else that has nothing to do with turning lead into gold is fair game. And I really genuinely wish that more negatively superstitious Catholics would stop trying to play this semantic game, where they try to say that even spagyrics was condemned, when in reality it was not. St. Albert the Great practiced spagyrics. Thomas Aquinas might have known a little bit of medicine. Hildegard von Bingen certainly would have. She was a physician, and she made medicine. Her Hildegard's Physica is likely, like, yes, it's her own composition and her own sort of recipe book of remedies, but I guarantee you it's not the only thing that she had in her possession that had to do with medicine. There's no way that she only used the remedies that she herself wrote down. That would be incredibly narcissistic and unbefitting of a saint. It makes more sense that someone who is holy, who was a physician, would have been someone who not only utilized things that they themselves had discovered or had revealed to them, in her case, but to also use that which was already established. So, I want to point this guy here. He was the first to draw the correspondence of the stations of passion, death, and resurrection of Christ with the stages of the alchemical process, and thus afforded us Catholic cunning men and women, those who aspire to be Sophiurgists, to be able to incorporate alchemy into our practices, so long as we view it in terms of relating to Christ's passion, death, and resurrection. It's an opportunity for us to meditate on those things. And one of the things that alchemists did was, like, their laboratory was a space akin to entering a sanctuary. They did not want they entered into their laboratories, if they were worth their salt. They had entered their laboratories with almost with a meditative state upon themselves, with the goal of reducing the influence of the demonic in whatever it was that they were doing. They knew that there were evil spirits, that they would try their best to get into every last little thing, and so they made their laboratories a place of prayer, ora et labora. And as Tomberg tells us, work and prayer, like magic is work and prayer, and Christian Hermeticism is the and, which is the plus sign, the cross. And 1 and 2 gives birth to 3. A and B gives birth to C. And work and prayer. There's a quote from Johannes Trithemius, the Benedictine abbot that was a pseudo-mentor of Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. And he had he has a letter that he wrote to someone named Gane, wherein he kind of gives this sort of sequence of how a miracle occurs, like explaining like how is it that magic works, and he explains it. And what he's explaining isn't technically, like, as far as I can tell, to me it doesn't seem as if what he's describing is arbitrary or personal magic. It sounds like what he's describing is more akin to sacred magic. Give me 1 second. I'm going to try to reach. No, I can't reach. Okay. That kills me. I don't think that I have it written down in any of my essays yet, but it'll get included because part of this video is discussing topics that are going to be treated slightly in the next installment of the Wonder Working Essays series. Let's see. So yeah. So we'll kind of we'll wind down a little bit. Here. First, let me look at some comments here. See, this is such a helpful description, especially with the image of the axis. There are a similar diagram in one of the letters. I have just begun slowly diving into the text on my own this past month. Oh, yeah, actually. Can I reach that? No, I can't reach it. Let me see if I can pull up. Oh, let's see. I know that somewhere early on in meditations, he provides one of the earlier diagrams featuring the cross, where he fills in what I have rendered as A and B. For the life of me, I can't remember which letter it is that the first diagram is shown. Yeah, here we go. So, justice. So it's in letter 8. There's one one of the early instances talking about the scale that justice holds, that it's a cross. It forms a T, a tau. It's not one of the better instances. There's another one. It must be later. I don't know if it's in the Hermit. I can't remember. There we go. There it is. Oh yeah. So right here. Let me wind this for you. We'll go 1-page view so you can see it a little bit better. There it is. Yeah, and this passage kind of touches on this idea that this idea about you can't you have to be in, like, he's talking about like being in service. There's the idea, a lot of ideas that he has about what he calls Christian Hermeticism has to do a lot with being in service to the arts and to religion. Like, to be a Christian Hermeticist has to do with being of service, which is a sacrificial act, and all that symbolism entails. And so this is an example, an instance where he uses the hermeneutic of the cross, and he assigns to the A and B axes, different concepts. So here, religion is the vertical. Makes perfect sense. Science is the horizontal. Um, and they're not opposed to each other. You know, you can easily swap out for the vertical axis faith and the horizontal axis reason, and in doing so, you basically you create a hermeneutic with which to view what Thomas Aquinas did, and what he did was unheard of in his time. Was he rendered reason to the service of faith, and faith rendered service unto reason. They weren't opposites, they were complementaries, and he demonstrated it. And their conjunction, where they consummated, it gave birth to a deeper understanding. It created a doorway through which it became easier for us to enter into contemplation. But unfortunately, in today, and this is just a little tangent, unfortunately, today, too many people have become hyper-Thomists, hyper-scholastics. They've become more rational, they've become rationalists more than they, in one sense. But then the answer to the hyper-rationalism on the part of modern scholastics and Thomists is not to become hyper fideists. You don't want to become a hyper mystic or whatever, and be opposed to reason, because then that just turns you into two opposing vertices parallel to each other that, in their attempt to consummate, they actually annihilate each other, and you get zilch. So there's an instance. It's in letter number 9 on the Hermit. Yeah, and there's a few others later on. But let me pull this up. So this is an illustration by Kunranth. He created this rather enigmatic book. Some consider it to be a work of syncretism, and thus heretical. Excuse me, but it may actually serve to be an example of the time of an attempt to restore all things in Christ. There's what is it? Pope Saint Pius X. His motto was to restore all things in Christ. And I don't think that people have taken into consideration the absolute breadth of what that statement actually entails, because all things means all things. There's no qualifier to the statement, and so there was an attempt in the Renaissance to try to restore the knowledge that was held by the rabbinic Jews. Unfortunately, some of those attempts were viewed in a grossly negative light that was imprudent in many instances. And in other instances, there were rabbinic Jews who did truly and intentionally deceive the people who were attempting to genuinely restore whatever knowledge they had in the light of Christ and in Christ, and thus were deceived in a way that it caused confusion. And from that confusion came the errors in the Renaissance of the syncretism that we sometimes saw, most especially in magical texts of the period. Um, so, and which naturally led to whatever the Rosicrucians actually were, which also eventually led to the Freemasons being established in 1717, and a bunch of other unfortunate things. And so this illustration comes from this book that Kunranth made. The illustrations are very beautiful. This is actually a close-up of a much larger page. And what it depicts is I guess you could call it the alchemist's laboratory, is how it's often rendered. But notice it's not just alchemy that's happening in this photo. There's music. There's all kinds of stuff happening on this table. Like, what, a spool of thread? Almost looks like he's bookbinding. He's taking notes. He's playing music. He's making stuff. He's measuring things. You know, and, down here he's got his furnace and everything. He's got his extra glassware there. He's got some more glassware up here. He's got his ingredients. You can see their ingredients. They're labeled. They contain all the various materials. And he's got another oven. He's got all kinds of stuff going on here. He's got the coal for the oven. He has a little sensor. I'm assuming that's supposed to be some kind of like chalice thing, what have you. And here's his little sanctuary that he's made for himself. A place that is set aside and distinct, but yet still a part of the place in which he makes his practice of all the other arts. And we see something very similar to this being depicted here. The first arcanum of the tarot. So, this table right here is the same. It's the same. Notice you don't see the whole table. You don't see the rest of the table. You only see the one end of the table. Well, the rest of the table here is here. And yeah. So yeah, we for those of us who want to be Catholic cunning men, cunning women, Sophiurgists, however you want to describe it, we have to be like this guy, like what my thumbnail says. We need to be like this guy. Widely studied. He's widely studied. He knows music. He knows mathematics. He knows alchemy. But he also understands the spiritual component. He understands the spiritual aspect of everything he's doing, of everything he studies. And he's able to treat the soul through music. He's able to treat the body through medicine. And he's able to do it within the context of God's commandments and in the context of whatever it is that the Lord impresses upon his heart. And one thing that I love about this illustration is that it doesn't depict him doing all of his other things. It depicts him doing the thing that you should be doing first and foremost, which is praying, communing, listening to the divine, to your holy guardian angel. Because it's only in contact with the divine that you're going to be able to steer clear from as many instances of personal magic as you possibly can. And at the very least, to remain within the realm of safety. should you find yourself in the situation of enacting some form of personal magic. Now, quick caveats. What this does not mean. This does not mean. This does not mean that we are. This does not mean that we have the license to perform Goetia. Goetia is sorcery because you're dealing with unconscious forces of things you do not understand. You're by doing the Goetia, you're basically putting yourself in the same. Actually, you're putting yourself in a worse situation than Eve was. Eve didn't summon the serpent to show themselves. The serpent did that of its own accord. Eve just happened to notice that he was there. So the Goetia is worse than the incident in the garden with the forbidden tree, because in that instance you are summoning the demonic into your presence for any untold ends. And then planetary magic is kind of the same thing. Crafting of talismans, that one. The issue with talismans has to do with the figures and the figures, the symbols, the letters that you impress upon the talisman. It's more arbitrary, the relationship between letters and celestial bodies, despite all the theories that are out there. What's less arbitrary is the correspondence of the actual plants, stones, and the like, unmarked. Now, an amulet, on the other hand, is a different story. It's not quite the same as a talisman. Amulets can fall within arbitrariness. But Thomas Aquinas does much to help us in regards to the question of the crafting of amulets, and we actually have a recent discovery of a silver Christian amulet that was recovered, and it has an invocation of a saint carved into a little leaflet of silver that's rolled up and put into a little cylinder that's worn around the neck. Now, the selection of this, so in the selection of your materials, you can potentially take into consideration whatever the celestial influences are that Aquinas and Saint Albert the Great are in agreement about. But as far as like the markings themselves, the symbols used, the sigils, and so on and so forth, there's no theological backing, as far as I understand, concerning the arbitrary symbols themselves, especially if they are unknown. Now, if one can extrapolate, or if one can through reason determine the origin of a symbol and its meaning, that would be one thing. Unfortunately, a lot of occult literature contains too many sigils and symbols that have no known origin, and it's in that place of unknown, where one risks falling into sorcery, being the instrument of unconscious forces. Unconscious or unknown forces is another way to put it. So it's much safer to I would say to stick to the formulas that we have within within historical Christian examples of amulets. And the best example that I always point to is the Saint Benedict medal, which we can do a live stream about. We might do it next week. There will eventually be an essay about it, trying to compile everything that I've learned so far about the Benedict medal, its origins, and its place in the Catholic cunning man's cornucopia or apothecary. So, yeah, astrological magic. It's not. Yeah, there's. I wouldn't put too much stock in it. To everything there is a season, and celestial bodies are signs of many things. And Aquinas, again, even Aquinas admits that there is celestial influence, but they incline, they do not compel. They can't compel that which has free will. Everything that isn't a human being doesn't strictly speaking have free will, and so are under heavier influence. We can utilize those things in order to assist the parts of our physiology and anatomy that are influenced, that are outside of our exercise of the will, so to speak. And this is where things like astrology come into play: natal astrology, medicinal, or natal astrology, medical astrology, and electional astrology. Even the Catholic Church used electional astrology for determining when to break ground on the construction of cathedrals and basilicas, and also when to perform the dedications and consecrations of the same architectural wonders. So, and these are all instances of more or less personal magic that does fall within the zone of safety versus of danger. And one of the best examples of them all being the three magi following the signs in the heavens and their meaning, interpreting their meaning, as well as their physical, spatial positioning and where it spatially pointed to. So lots of stuff to consider, lots of things to contemplate on, and I pray that you all are able to do so very fruitfully. And I hope that this was of good use, it brings good fruit. If it does, please like, share, and subscribe. Spread the word. And then again, just as a quick reminder, we have the Substack. I'll make sure to fix the description to the video so that it has the links to everything. And again, if you want to support, here's all the ways in which you can support. You can subscribe as a free subscriber. If you do a monthly or annual, you get access to the voiceover editions of all my pieces. The first one has finally been recorded and uploaded. You can buy me a coffee if you don't want to do a monthly or annual subscription. Every little cent helps cover medical bills, necessities of life, and so on and so forth. But if you want to be the Cosimo Medici to my Marsilio Ficino, please feel free in your generosity to join the Societas Sophiurgica. Doing so, you gain access to the audio versions of all the pieces, but most importantly, we get to have physical correspondence, snail mail, handwritten, typewritten. If you want me to dust off my typewriter, if you want me to go to town clacking at it, that's the way to get it off the shelf, out of the case. And to also have, if you want to have more personal conversations about questions that you have, ideas that you have, or anything that you may think may be of benefit for your research purposes or my research purposes, that would be a really great way. Not to mention, I love getting mail. I really do. I used to be part of a fountain pen club and used to exchange handwritten letters with some of the members of that group. It was a lot of fun. So I hope that those of you who are feeling generous enough, even if it's just for 1 year, if you want to spend some time in the Societas Sophiurgica, that founders tier is available for you. All right, and with that, we will conclude with prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Our Lady Co-Redemptrix, pray for us. Our Lady Mediatrix of all graces, pray for us. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Thank you so much, my dear unknown friends. God bless.